So, namaste, Mr. Pattanaik.
Hi, namaste.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the DC South Asian Literary Festival. And it is my pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. How do I address you?
So my name is Swati Chaturvedi. So please call me Swati.
Okay. And call me Devdutt.
Thank you. So Devdutt, let's just delve right into it. I've been listening to your talks and other interviews as well, and I've pulled out some things that I wanted our viewers to particularly understand better. And then I would love to get into pilgrimation. So,
sure.
So starting with mythology, if you can define for us, I know you talk about the technical definition of the word and then also how you look at the word. And let's start right there.
So mythology is a cultural truth. How does a culture see the world? So that's the simplest definition you can get. So it's subjective. It's not objective. That's the important thing. It is subjective. It belongs to a people. It is how a people see the world. So every community in the world looks at the world in a particular way, whether it's the Aborigines of Australia, whether it is the residents of New York, whether it is people in Berlin, whether it is in Nigeria, it doesn't matter. Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Native Americans, Black Americans, anyone. Everyone has a particular view of the world, which is subjective and belongs to that community. And they transmit it over generations through stories, symbols, and rituals. So that's the world of mythology, really. So I use a very simple way. I say, a fact is everybody's truth, which is based on evidence. Fiction is nobody's truth. And myth is somebody's truth. So some people believe that God is somebody's truth. So it's a mythological concept. Justice is somebody's truth. It's not a real fact. People don't realize justice is not fact. Equality is not fact. It is what we believe. We want the world to be just. We want the world to be equal. But it is a cultural truth, not a natural truth. So that becomes a subject of the social sciences or humanities. And that's what mythology is.
Yeah, and you've talked about how this word did not exist 200 years ago. So can you talk to us about a little bit about the origin of the word?
So the word mythology, or the subject of mythology, really emerges in the about 150 to parallel to history. Even history did not exist 200 years ago. History as a subject is only 150 years old. Before that, memories, legends were all part of history. Everything was history. So, for example, if you go to Cambridge University in the UK, they will say their charter that they got their charter from King Arthur. Now, King Arthur of Avalon gave the charter for the Cambridge University. Now, that is not a historical fact. That's a legend. So, but now this whole idea that it is what we call history today and the method of studying emerged only in the last 150 years. So that's the first thing to remember. And it really emerged because Europeans were trying to understand the worldviews of people they were now conquering and they were becoming the masters of. So Asia, Africa, America, the different people they encountered, they said, okay, what are these people talking about? Their views of life and world. They use the word myth. Now, the word myth, has a very long history. So let's go to the history of the word. The word mythos first time emerges in the Greek world. And mythos, there are two words. Mythos is used for the world of storytelling. And logos is reason, rationality, argument. These two words emerge. Now, we must be careful that we assume that logos was something the Greeks preferred. But they really looked down upon the word logos because they saw it as verbal sophistry. It is something that politicians use to trick people from fundamental truths, which are mythos. So mythos, the world of storytelling, was valued as something deep and mysterious, while logos was something which was used by politicians to convince people about whatever they wanted to convince them about. So that's how the Greeks looked at it. They never used the word truth. They just used that, the world seen through stories, the world seen through argument. Then about 1500 years ago, the Roman Empire became Christian. And when the Roman Empire became Christian, the church said Logos means God. Rationality, reason is God. And mythos is the world of false gods. So the first time this truth and falsehood binary emerges in the Roman church. And that happens only 1500 years ago. Again, never happened before. Then 500 years ago, something interesting happens. Science emerges. Science starts challenging the church. And science says that, you know what, the truth that you claim is not true. There is truth is based on evidence. So now logos becomes about science. And they put even God and monotheism and the church in the basket of mythos. But when it comes to India, we are really facing this very interesting world because there's the scientific mind on one side, there's a Christian mind on the other. They're fighting each other, and both of them are fighting the Indian cultural truth, saying that you are not scientific and you're not monotheistic, so this is mythology. So mythology came to mean polytheism in the 19th century. So in the 19th century, the word mythology was used for polytheism. Monotheism sort of parked itself very cleverly with science, but not anymore. Now you can't do that. Now, people like Richard Dawkins won't allow you to do that. So now it has gone into the world of mythology. So the word theology, for example, is just mythology for monotheism, nothing else. It's mythology of monotheism is called theology. But we use words like theology. These are all positioning words. It's basically cultural truth. God, Son of God, Prophet of God, Apocalypse, heaven, hell. These are all cultural truths. These are not universal truths by any stretch of the imagination.
And something that I particularly appreciate in how you talked about mythology just now, you talk about how you are not looking at the world as a binary. There's not a binary view of the world because so many people have their own truths, and it's what their worldview is. So that nuanced view of the world is refreshing, especially because, at times we become so polarized, so divided, and we take such extreme positions. So on that note of a more nuanced view of the world, I found it very interesting. I was listening to one of your talks, and you talk about the operating systems. And basically you use the example of the Android versus the iOS, and you know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear from you, just if you could set that up for our audience, and also talk about the Indian operating system and what is our nuanced view of the world.
So when I talk to people around the world, I first ask them the question, so do you live one life or many lives? And the audience sort of gets stumped at this question because they say we live one life. And then I said, okay, what happens after you die? And does any scientist know the answer? And nobody knows the answer. And then you realize that most parts of the world have been conditioned to believe you live only once. And when you die, you will be, perhaps, depending on which faith you belong to, you'll be judged. And there's something called a judgment day in America. If you see all these vampire shows, and you see all these angels and demons and all these Hollywood mythology which emerges, apocalypse, zombie, they all talk of one life and the world coming to an end, and then a judgment happening with God. Now that's one operating system where you live only once, and therefore you have only one chance. Everything has to be sorted in this one life. India, what is unique about the Indian subcontinent, it's the land where the idea of rebirth emerged. That you live many lives. This is not the only life. You come with some baggage and you leave with some baggage. And it's not that you come with a clean slate. Why were you born in a particular family? Why was I born in a particular family? Why were you given this body? Why was I given this body? Why was I given these privileges? Why were you not given these privileges? These are questions very difficult to answer. So they said, okay, there is something called rebirth. You are bearing the fruit of your previous lives. And if you think your life is wonderful, then you can say this fruit is sweet. If you think your life is horrible, then you can say the sweet is bitter. But we really don't know. But you are a function of many lives. So rebirth is the operating system of India. If anybody explains Gita to you or Vedas to you or anything India, do not factor in rebirth. They are not explaining Indian philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, Jain philosophy. So when I hear these Buddhism was popular, now it's not so popular, or yoga, when they talk about these subjects and they don't talk about rebirth, then that's a false understanding of India, because you are trying to align it with one life. where there is a sense of achievement becomes important. So the Greeks believed in one life, the Christians believe in one life, the Jewish people believe in one life, Islam believes in one life. These are Middle Eastern mythologies. So mostly Middle East is where the idea of one life emerged. And India is the place where the idea of multiple lives emerged. And these are the two ideas very different from each other. So, I always give this example of mathematics. If you live only once, the the denominator of your life is one, which means the value of your life is the sum total of your achievements. So whatever you achieve is what you've done in your life. But Indian thought will say, but you know what? You live many lives. This is one of many lives. You live infinite lives. So the denominator of your existence is infinity. So no matter what you do, the value of your life is zero. Now that's a very different way of looking at the world. So you can imagine what will let's say an athlete or a successful businessman, let's say I talk to a Mark Zuckerberg or a Mukesh Ambani or Putin, what operating system would they prefer? The one where they say that the value of your life is the sum total of your achievement, or another operating system which says no matter what you achieve, it amounts to nothing. So two very different operating systems. Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism emerges from this second operating system. And most people who talk about India and Indian philosophy never factor it in their conversations. So I usually go to the index page of these books and check how many times they refer to rebirth. They use the word karma, but they don't talk about it. They pussyfoot around the word rebirth because they're trying to say the scientific. And I'm like, you know what? We don't know what happens after death. But rebirth is India's contribution to the world. And every idea in India revolves around rebirth. And whether it is to be taken literally or metaphorically is up to us. We don't know what they mean. Judgment Day. I mean, why do all of my Hollywood films are based on them saving the world, saving the world, saving the world. Where does it come from? Why are superheroes so obsessed with saving the world? Because it comes from a Christian thinking. One day the world will come to an end. Qayamat ka concept, the idea of the devil, the idea of the final confrontation between Jesus and the devil, rapture. These are very big ideas in Hollywood because the writers are based from an American. How much ever they'll say we're secular, we're atheist, doesn't matter. You genuinely believe in one life. You believe in a confrontation. Look at Harry Potter. At the end of the day, it becomes a confrontation between Harry Potter and Voldemort. So it's just like, or you look at all those films where, wizards are fighting each other. When you see Star Wars, you have Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, one dressed in white, one dressed in black, fighting each other. These are all Christian motifs, repeated again and again and again. And now they're not even hiding it. Now Darth Vader actually carries a saber which looks like a crucifix. So you see this structure, which is an operating system of the West. It's not an operating system of India. Operating system of India, at least the traditional operating system, is a very different one. But we are sort of avoiding, we don't want to talk about it. I see Guruji is also trying to talk. They usually talk what is there in American evangelical TV, only they use Indian vocabulary, but they're really talking about achievement, kuch karna hai zindagi mein, you have to achieve something in life. And the moment you talk about achievement, it's really Greek mythology. It's not Indian mythology at all. Achievement is not part of Indian thought at all.
So if you could share your thoughts on how we, the people as a whole, how we operate in that Indian operating system, just, the masses, like common people like me, because it is part of our culture. It is part of something that gets passed down.
So it is at a very fundamental level. How do you engage with people around you? That's the whole point. It's not about being great. You're never going to be great. You are one tree in the forest. Now, what is the value of a tree in the forest? That tree provides shelter to so many animals and birds. The roots, it eats from the forest eats it. So if you look at the metaphor of eating, look at a tree. The tree takes sunlight, it takes water, it takes things from the ecosystem in order to survive. But it also gives something to the ecosystem. It allows birds, it allows animals, it allows reptiles it allows travelers to take shade in its trees. So it provides fruits, flowers, various kind of herbs. So we are like that tree. We are all like a tree. We are part of forest. And we take something, we have to give something. And that's what life is all about. We are different kinds of trees. Some are fruit bearing, some are flowers, some are small, some are big. And this diversity is explained through rebirth. Why are you a big tree? Why am I a small tree? Why am I a shrub? Why are you a fern? Why is someone a creeper? Why is someone a thorny bush? Why is someone a medicinal plant? Why is someone, why do some trees have long lifespan, some have short lifespan? This is the easiest way to explain Indian philosophy. That figure out which forest you are in, how do you engage with the world. So there is no God out there going to tell you how to live your life. Therefore, you never have the concept of commandments. At best you'll have because you can't make up your own mind, you can't think for yourself. You go to a Guruji and the Guruji will give you a set of sermons of how to live your life because you've surrendered, you've outsourced your thinking to someone else. But really, Atma is inside you. You can think for yourself and you can figure it out yourself. You can take help from people around you. You read the books, you figure it out. But ultimately, it's the relationships that you form with people around you. We live in an ecosystem of relationships. And that is at the heart of Indian thought. Now, in Hinduism, the relationship is very important, connecting with people. So at a metaphorical level, it meant marriage was important, household was important, family was important. Buddhists and Jains said, no, withdrawing from this world is important. So monks become important. So Buddhism and Jainism valued monks more than the household. So that's why the Buddha's image is always a single person with eyes shut. Jain Tirthankara, single man standing straight with eyes shut. But the Hindu images will be Shiva with Parvati, Vishnu with Lakshmi. So husband and wife sitting together, holding each other's hands, gazing into each other's eyes, children around them. So Shiva is surrounded by his family. Vishnu is doing things. He's got a bow in his hand. He's on a chariot. He's doing things. He's participating in the world. So the Buddhist and the Jain view was to withdraw from the world. And the Hindu view was to engage with the world. And that's why they were different from each other. The Buddhism and Jainism sort of separated in their thinking. They said, no, family life is not important. Withdrawal and focusing on the inner journey is important. The Hindu thought said, no, the external journey is important. Engaging with others, family, parents, children, your employees, your bosses, your neighborhood. It is more social.
And also the concept of divinity in everything, right? If you can also talk to that.
So this, when we use these words, divinity and God, unfortunately, we are very colored with a Western lens. Because remember, most of our writings, like when people read Vivekananda, I keep telling people that Vivekananda was from a very rich, affluent Bengali family. He was educated by missionaries. He lived in Bengal and he was answerable to the colonial power. So we keep using the word God, God, God. And this word of God and this old man with big beard in the Sistine Chapel becomes something like Brahma. There's no connection really. We are really talking about at a very fundamental level, nowadays people use words like pseudoscientific words like consciousness and all that, but basically it means you as a person. So divinity there is no divinity as a God out there who's going to judge you, which is a very Western concept, or who says you're right and wrong, or Krishna telling you what to do. This is how they try to read the Gita. Krishna is telling Arjun what to do. And I'm like, you've never read the Gita clearly. Because it's all about how do you engage with the world. And it's your day-to-day life. How do you engage with the world? Are you consuming the world? Are you nourishing the world? Are you threatened by the world? Are you threatening the world? And what is divinity? Divinity is, ask yourself, that which makes you feel safe and nourished. So if you make people feel safe and nourished, you are divinity. It's as simple as that. How many people around you feel safe and nourished? Now think of all the people you meet and how frightened we are of some people, how terrified we are of them, how we don't want to be around them. And that shows the lack of divinity, because a divine space will be like water to a thirsty person, where you come and quench your thirst. So are you the water to the thirsty people around you? And that's all it is. It's a very simple, practical living, which they use a lot of colorful metaphors, Lakshmi, Durga, and we make it all fabulous. But it's basically a very simple code of conduct of how to live your life. And they have a ritual way of expressing it. So you have a ritual way of expressing it. But it comes down to, are you connecting with the world? Are you engaging with the world? It's not out there. It's all inside you. So Atma, the word Atma means within. The word Atma is within you. So divinity within you is Atma. Divinity outside you is Brahman. They use all these big words. But it basically means every one of us can be divine. All of us can be nourishing. All of us can be compassionate. All of us can provide an ecosystem of security to people around us. And that's what divinity is all about. So it's not something supernatural, somebody coming with flapping wings to save you, somebody. All those stories are nice stories, but they're lovely ways of explaining that when you are in trouble, someone comes to help you. That's God. So let's say you are in trouble, you're going through a bad shape, and your friend comes and talks to you. You have lost your job and somebody helps you find a job. Somebody, you're alone at home, you have to go to work, you need someone to babysit, and somebody just offers, don't worry, I'll take care of the child. At that moment, that person is divine. For that brief moment, because they've enabled you, they've surprised you, they have been kind in a world which is otherwise cruel. That's divinity.
And again, that nuanced view of the world that we were talking about right there, so thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So let's dive into Pilgrim Nation, the book. So if you can start us off by just telling us, yes, if you can hold it up again. So Pilgrim Nation and the making of Bharatvarsh.
Yes.
So Devdutt, what is the central idea or ideas behind the book?
So, how is a country made? And one of the things which connects India is the pilgrim routes. So from north to south, east to west, what connects India is the pilgrim routes. And we never talk about the pilgrim. We always talk of kingdoms in terms of kings, conquests, conquerors, empires, like the kings who conquered the world, who fought wars. We never talk about the pilgrim, the person who crossed the mountains, crossed the rivers, traveled along coasts, went into deep valleys, found gods on mountaintops, in dark caves. These are the people who created India. So India was created by these men and women who traveled and found gods, so as to say, in these forests, in these mountains, in these rivers, in these rocks, who established these temples, these routes to travel. And I think that's what my book is about, that India is recognized through pilgrim spots. It's an unusual, you don't find it anywhere else in the world. You do have the idea of holy spots across the world, but this kind of a one country connected by holy spots is something that is not found anywhere else. It's just a very unique Indian phenomenon.
And so basically the stories, the symbols, the traditions, the rituals, that is what connects us as a people. But you talk about how living in one part of India, we might be largely unaware of these stories and symbols and rituals in another part of India. And I can attest to that because I grew up in India, lived there up until at least my early 20s. There is so much that I don't know about other parts of our country, and more so the specific rituals. And I feel like there is enough commonality that you feel like you do understand Indian culture, but we have such diversity. And in researching this book, I was fascinated by the things that you had mentioned because I'd never learned about them. So it's almost a two-part, why is it and how is it that we've become so unaware? And also the other aspect of that is if you could tell us the commonalities.
So I think we never needed to be aware of other parts of India. You lived in your village most of your life. You were familiar with your family rituals, your family. Even in the village, you would perhaps not know everybody in the village. If you were a woman, especially, you didn't have mobility. If you're an upper class woman, definitely least mobility. Women from a lower caste or lower caste perhaps had more access to space than to affluent women who were cloistered in their courtyards. Even the men wouldn't have access. They would live in the same village, the same farm. They would travel maybe to the market, maybe to a nearby shrine. But then over time, they would decide we must go on a yatra, a great trip. And then you see a little bit of India and you may experience, and suddenly you realize that you were living a little frog in a well, and suddenly you discover a huge world out there. It's only now that we have got telecommunications, we have access to different parts of India. Otherwise, very few people had really access to all these things in the pre-industrial societies. Nobody did. Nobody saw the gods and goddesses. It's now we have access to information technology, telecommunication, and suddenly we are looking at India from a satellite, and we are seeing the shape of India. I don't think anybody thought about it. We just knew there were north, there were mountains, south, there were oceans. There was a desert on the western side. There was the Gangetic Plains on the eastern side. Beyond that, beyond Assam, we didn't know much about them. So the fact is, not many people knew everything, but we knew that wherever we went, there would be something familiar. And what was familiar that you would find across villages, most pilgrim spots in India, you will find something to do with Hindu. If you go to a Hindu shrine, they'll say there is something to do with Vishnu, something to do with Shiva, something to do with the goddess. So if there's a goddess shrine, there would be also Shiva shrine, there'll also be a Vishnu shrine. It's possible you'll find something Jain there. It's possible you'll find something Buddhist there. So all five things would be seen. So even now when you go to, say, for example, even an archaeological site like Ellora, you will get Buddhist caves, you'll get Jain caves, you'll get Hindu caves. Then the Hindu caves will be classified as Vaishnava caves, Shaivite caves, and Shakta. So you find these five things across India and spread across. And then if you start analyzing, okay, what's the similarity and difference? Then you realize that the Buddhist caves and the Jain caves are more monastic. They talk about giving up the world, withdrawing from the world. As I said, most of the imagery would be a single man either seated or standing. In the Buddhist caves, you might find images of the Bodhisattva Jataka stories, of certain stories about Buddha's previous life, but everything centers around Buddha. Jainism, everything centers around the Jinnah, male figures standing or sitting monks. The moment you come to the Hindu shrine, you see more activity, more stories, more form, more diversity in imagery. And then you start noticing certain interesting details. The goddess shrines, for example, would show the goddess in very powerful positions, battling a demon, sitting on corpses, holding lotus flowers in her hand, holding a lute in her hand, multiple goddesses, very powerful images, all single. There are no men around them. The men are in supplicant positions. And that's the Shakta traditions. When you go to the Vishnu traditions, you find royal imagery like Ram or a wild boar raising a earth goddess from the earth, from the sea, or you have Narasimha in lion form trying to fight. And so you have got these violent imagery. And then you have a Shiva images, which are more family oriented. Shiva fighting demons, but also associated with his wife and his two children. So you suddenly find a hermit who has become a householder, that's Shiva. A householder, Vishnu, who is really a hermit because you never see his children. You never find images of Vishnu's children in the artwork. And the independent goddess emerging. So you find these three clusters as the Hindu cluster, the Buddhist, and the Jain cluster. This is common across India. And you find this from North to South India everywhere. Buddhism, of course, was forgotten in India for a very long time, revived in the last 100 years. Buddhism only thrived in the Himalayan belt, nowhere else. But the rest of India did not have Buddhism. Jainism had its own little communities across India. We don't realize that Karnataka has a very strong Jain foundation. Gujarat and Rajasthan has a lot of Jain, but Jainism was found across India. Small shrines which are forgotten now, but they are there across India. And then the Hindu shrines which emerged from the 7th century, 5th, 6th, 7th century, much later than what we think. And you find them across India. And that's the commonality. You find they're all talking about life. They're all talking about, should we be part of life? Should we withdraw from life? Nobody's talking about judgment day. Nobody's talking about be a good person, otherwise you'll suffer in hell. Be a bad person. If you're a good person, you will go to heaven. If you're a bad person, you'll go to hell. This idea is not very evident in the artwork. It's just not there. If you follow God's rules, you'll go to heaven. If you don't follow God's rules, you'll go to hell. You don't see that artwork anywhere. You will just find gods trying to struggle with wives and children and dealing with problems and quarrels and palace politics and withdrawing the day-to-day life, the day-to-day grind. Sometimes fighting, sometimes accommodating, sometimes loving, sometimes. So you find these images, day-to-day living, never about when you die, have you been a good boy or a bad boy? No such concept.
And related to that, if you can talk about the Indian temples or Hindu temples as the house of God and the concept of Pran Pratishta. I don't think a lot of us know these maybe these are basics, but yeah, so I just thought it would be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, so a mosque is a place where you gather to pray to God. So every Friday, people will go to a place and they pray to God. Or you go to a church every Sunday, everybody's expected to go on Sunday, sit and listen to the sermon, and you're effectively connecting in communion with God. But when Hindus go to a temple, they're going to visit God. So that's God's house. The name for the temple is really Devalaya, the God's house. And you go where he sort of, you go with food for him, you give offerings, flowers, you ask things from him, you sit in his house, you eat in his house, you offer him food, he offers you food, you do darshan, you look at him, you praise him, you sing songs for him, depending on the temple rituals. But basically, you're going to see God. You're not going to pray to God. You're going to see him, darshan karo, look at him, see him, the way you go to visit a friend, the way you go to visit a family member. You go and visit them and you give them some gifts and they give you some gifts and you go back home and you ask something and they ask you something. And that's all the ritual is. It's a very basic ritual. So the Prana Pratishtha as a practice is not all statues are worshipped. You can have any statue, you can buy a statue off a shelf, put it in the museum, put it in your house. That's not worship. In order to be worshipped, you have to endow it with this idea that for now, I consider you as the living embodiment of divinity, which means I see you as a person, which means I have to feed you every day, bathe you every day, clothe you every day, take care of you every day. It sounds very simplistic, but the children have Barbie dolls and doll houses, and we don't realize psychologically these are very powerful practices which help children appreciate household life. And the temples were designed around this ritual to tell people, how do you live happily? So the idea that the God is bathed every day, he is washed every day, he eats food regularly, he has different, in different seasons, he wears different clothes, he has different festivals, as the year progresses, his life changes, diet changes. And in many ways, you are being trained of how to conduct your own life. Get up in the morning, take a bath, do your job, take rest in the afternoon, meet people in the evening, dress properly, be well dressed. It should smell nice. So you have flowers and perfumes, you eat good food, you have different foods during seasons. So really the temple ritual is how you're supposed to conduct your own life. And you can imagine people when the religion was spreading, people would see this and say, oh, I should also live like this. So my house should have a toran and my house should be clean. And the way we maintain the temple, it has a kitchen and it has a treasury and it has certain rituals. There's a front house, there's a private house. There is a dance room. So nowadays we have places where we entertain ourselves. We have the den, we have the dining room. Exactly the way a temple is designed. So temple is designed like a home.
Yeah, and Devdutt, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about my rituals that I've seen my nani, my maternal grandmother, do, where she had an elaborate ritual for bathing all the gods and wrapping them in festive clothing and giving them appropriate prasad and food. So yes, definitely seen that.
Many times when the women would not be treated nicely by the family, this was their escape. So the family would not treat them well. They would be lonely. Nobody cares for them. You can imagine these women married to houses far away, no connection with their maternal homes. This was the place of escape. This was therapy. I can take care of God. God takes care of me. I feed God. God feeds me. You have this private, you can talk to someone. He loves you back. It's a very powerful therapy that people don't realize. That's why children need dolls. You can't, talk to any doctor. They will say, no. It's very important for children to have action figures because they express their emotions through dolls. And that's the origin of these practices. You need these icons to cope with the brutality of life. Life is tough.
Okay, so continuing on the thread of children. So Devdutt, when I was growing up in India, I had Amar Chitrakatha, and that was my way of at least familiarizing myself with so many of our stories and our cultural traditions and symbols. Now, I know that Amar Chitrakatha is still available, but I do understand that we don't consume those as much as we did growing up. So my question is, in what ways can we continue to preserve these stories, whether it's just through storytelling, the oral tradition, and why is it important? Why is it important in today's world, as we are now a global village? There's so much more to our lives living in different parts of the country. We are exposed to so much more, but why is it so important that we actually make an effort to conserve and carry forward these stories, rituals, and symbols?
What do parents give their children? They can give them food, clothing, shelter. They can give them education, and they can transmit culture. How do you transmit culture? How do you transmit the world you came from to your children? Does it matter? Do Native Americans have to know about Native American traditions? Do Black Americans need to know about Black history and how they were brought to America? Does that matter? What were the beliefs and practices of their people? All those things you have to ask yourself, and what do I want to give my children? Now, Amar Chitrakatha was created in a particular time, 1970s. They were meant for certain children who had not, there was no other thing to read. We lived in a very different India. You didn't have television, you didn't have radio was there. This was a very new phenomena called comic book, which had never been experienced in India. And it was done very smartly. It was distributed very cleverly, and it reached a large number of kids in India. Not all Indian kids, but a large proportion of kids. Then came television. Now you have lots of sources of information. And the question is, now you have got information overload. And the children don't, now the new generation of children is wondering, why should I know these stories? How do they matter? And that's the job of the parent, as to why they matter. Because why does a story matter and the other story does not matter? And really, parents themselves are not clear what they want to communicate, because you see, we are so busy with our vocational lives, earning money, bringing food to the table, the day-to-day running. We ourselves don't know what is culture that we want to transmit, because we suddenly discover our children are very different from the way we treated our children. So when you grew up in India, you never thought about the fact that every corner you went to, there was a temple, there were images of gods and goddesses. They were just there. Nobody bothered about it. Today, these are topics of conversation. You could, what is a tilak? What is being a Muslim? Why do you have elephant-headed god? Why do you, so you have got these questions. Why do your parents do this ritual? Why do they do that? And parents themselves don't know why they do it, because rituals usually are not explained. Rituals are just performed. It's like birthday. I keep telling people that, they keep saying, we don't understand. Do children ever ask you, why do you bring a birthday cake and why do you put candles on top of it? Why do you blow out the candle? You never ask a question about the origin of a birthday party ritual. But you are interested because that is what you do, because you enjoy it. But when you're told to do a ghar ki mein puja is there, the child doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't know why he's doing it. And he feels it's a burden, and he expresses or she expresses her resistance through questioning. I have never heard of a child saying, but why are you celebrating a birthday party? Why in America do they have a prom? It makes absolutely no sense. Why do you celebrate July the 4th? Why do you have Sunday as a holiday? Why is weekend a holiday? Why are we not working on a weekend? These are all rituals which we just don't realize they were rituals. So the point is not about Amar Chitrakatha or reading Ramayana or Mahabharata. The point is about asking these questions and helping them use the stories to understand. For example, if you look at this book, Pilgrim Nation, the cover shows the image of a man carrying two women in a basket. Now, what is that? And that becomes a conversation about a boy called Shravan Kumar who took his parents on a pilgrimage. That's a conversation. Now that's a conversation. And what does it mean? Because this idea of a young boy taking his parents on a pilgrimage is not there in all cultures. So therefore, it becomes a conversation about pilgrimage. It becomes a conversation about journeys. It's about holy places. And these conversations are how we transmit cultures. These books, stories, rituals are just enablers of those conversations. They, by themselves, in the current age, information era, you can't trust it on children that, oh, now you're an Indian, you have to read this book. No, no child is going to do that. He will go for Marvel comics, he'll go for DC comics. They're far more dynamic and beautiful and fun, but they're very shallow. And they're terrible in the sense they don't have any nuance. They're constantly talking about saving the world. They are not good for your self-image because all of them have six-pack abs. Well, Hindu gods are fat and plump and short and round, and they have all kinds of shapes and sizes. And it makes you wonder and ask you questions. Why is everybody dressed in this particular? Why do they have masks? When you start asking counter questions, then they realize that, oh, there's a conversation happening. And do you know why they're wearing masks? Why are they having secret identities? Why can't they just tell people who they are? And then you have these conversations, the cultural conversations, help children understand where they come from. That becomes important. If you think it's not important to tell children about their roots, then that's a different conversation, another conversation.
No, I agree. And you mentioned this concept of fun that I think we overlook. Like, I know growing up, my favorite festival was Holi because Holi was the most fun.
Yeah.
And so if we as parents could think about the notion of fun and then the idea of knowledge, where we understand, like, fun is almost like the entry point. Now your child is interested. Tell me more about Holi. But then you have enough knowledge to back it up. Like you said, these stories become a medium of learning more about life and how to conduct ourselves. And I think, Dave, that this also goes back to that concept of our Indian thought about living a good life as a good human being, serving others, right?
Yes, I think we forget that part about relationships. India revolves around the idea of dampatya. That's why gods have a wife. You don't find that in other cultures. The idea of a god with a wife and children, and always in a dynamic of relationship. Now, many temples increasingly finding Hinduism turning into a space where only a male image is there. There are no female images. So you'll see a lot of these political images, and you can see the erasing of the women taking place in political spaces. And it's conversation point. Why is it? Because in temples, you'll always have the male and female sitting together, which was against the Buddhist way, which is only a male figure sitting alone. Why is the woman not there? Now, that's a conversation to talk about equality and, women's rights and feminism. And it makes you wonder that, why you can't talk about Ram without talking about Sita. You can't talk about Ravan without talking about Mandodari. You can't talk about Krishna without talking about Radha. You have to talk about the women. You have to talk about class and caste. Why is Ram royal and Krishna is a cowherd? So you start asking about. So these are the conversations. This is how you make it interesting. You make it relevant to them.
And if I remember correctly, you had mentioned somewhere that even as we look at the stories from the North versus the South, different parts of India, that even our original stories and cultural symbols, you sometimes see the male figure only. I think in the northern part, you see more of the male and female together. But in the southern, but I could be wrong on that. So
it's the Krishna festivals, the Krishna images. People don't realize Radha images are not found in southern part of India.
No, this was new to me too.
Yeah, so it's a Gangetic phenomena. It's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Vallabhacharya popularized. But for example, if you're in Rajasthan, you do Srinathji temple, there is no female form next to Srinathji. It's alluded to, but it's not present physically. But if you do a Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the ISKCON temples, the female is very present over there. If you go to Swami Narayan temples, which are very popular across the world, the female form is there, but almost because it was built by an ascetic community. So the Swami Narayan people are run by monks and monasteries. So the female is not given that much of importance. But if you go to a Tirupati Balaji temple, you see only the female, but the male, but the female is in a separate shrine. So these are conversations that children would like to have. And, we're talking about diversity of the gods, all kinds of gods. So if that day I remember this child, I was in America, and said that, people make fun of me because I'm worshipping a elephant-headed god. So I said, isn't it a time to talk about othering and diversity, that people can be different, gods can be different. If you can't handle different gods, different foods, different ways of thinking, then you'll never be a tolerant society. Everybody doesn't have to be like you. And I think then the child suddenly felt empowered. The next day is going to go armed to say that why do you have a problem with something which is different? And that's a powerful conversation to have, especially in the world today, that, why can't a god have an elephant head? Who made the rules? Who made the rules? And show me the rule book of how gods are supposed to be. And then the conversation becomes interesting. The child gets power, he's just thinking, and he says, oh, Ganesha has enabled me to see the world differently.
Agreed. And Devdutt, I'm curious, I know mythology is your expertise, but I'm curious, as Devdutt was growing up, what were some of your favorite stories in Indian culture?
So I I was a medical student, and I didn't really think much about storytelling until much later in life. So it was not something, it was like a casual interest subject, not something that I took very seriously. I took it seriously only late 20s, really. I took it otherwise in schools and colleges, I used to read all the books that was there in the market. All these. My school had a fantastic library. And we had lovely books. And I used to really buy the picture books. I was obsessed with the picture books because the images. And I always wonder why there are better picture books about Roman cultures and Egyptian culture and Nordic culture, because they were printed in UK and US, very good quality books. And I would not find the same quality in the Indian books about Indian stories. Other than Amarchitra Katha, but in terms of the artwork, it was so limited. So that my exposure, those were my questions in those days. But I wasn't particularly fond of mythology in my school and college that much. It was just like all my friends, Amajitra Katha, Chanda Mama, nothing serious.
And how did you land up into illustrating your own books? Are you an artist as well?
So I have always been an artist. It has never been something, but I think for me, an idea becomes more clear when you illustrate it, because it helps the brain receive the information differently. Also, because I was tired of the same kind of imagery that I would see in art books. The calendar art was so sickening for me. It was like, no, there's different ways of visualizing male bodies, female bodies, visualizing, because it's all about stirring the imagination. So I wanted to illustrate things the way I imagined them.
Wonderful. And Devdutt, any closing comments for our audience?
I think, I think parents should read books more, because I think, especially since you are in the US, I see a lot of parents who migrated. When we were migrating, we never realized that we are going to carry the burden of culture with us. You migrate for economic reasons, social reasons, maybe political reasons, but I don't think we realize that we carry the baggage of culture with us, and wherever we go, it is with us. People expect us to answer questions about our cultures, which we are not equipped for. So I think equip yourself, read more, and share that knowledge with your children, because then they carry, otherwise they get warped ideas from weird people rather than, the more refined, sophisticated ideas of India. I see a lot of people having very, very warped ideas, not critical, and that's not healthy. You don't want your children to say that, oh my God, these Indians are crazy people, they are backward, because we are not giving them we're not giving them access to refined information. Really refined information. There is so much of clutter out there. I think one of the parents' job is to declutter and enable the child to, find power in their culture, because the culture, you can't wipe out your culture. It will always be with you.
No, thank you. That resonates with me, Devdutt, especially as a parent myself, and knowledge and fun. And, I definitely hope to do more of that with my children. So thank you so much for joining us today, Devdutt. It truly has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you
Namaste.
so much. Thank you. Namaste.